Hello! Our story begins inside Sidious' lair on the far side of Coruscant, inside the industrial sector of the city. The abandoned infrastructure depicted a once golden era that had died and withered away. It was a perfect allegory for what would become of the Republic. The Dark Lord of the Sith was with his apprentice, and they were discussing their future. The wise Dark Lord asked a student why he was brought out here, and it was because Sidious wanted to disclose an idea he had for the future. Plagueis was eager to hear what his young student had come up with. The Sith Lord knew his apprentice would be one of the best, and he consistently proved that he was capable of being as such. Sidious always had brilliant ideas, and it seemed as if he had one more brewing. Plagueis didn't realize it yet, but this plan would create a sense of distrust between the two of them. Sidious wanted to bring an end to the rule of two. It had been nearly a millennium since it was established, and yet the Sith were unable to find victory. Plagueis understood his student's concern, but the rule was created so that the Sith wouldn't destroy each other and send the religion into extinction. The whole purpose was to safeguard their future, one that had been passed down from generation to generation for the same amount of time. Sidious understood that, but the Jedi continued to grow more powerful. Sure, they were corrupt and they were becoming greater pawns of the Republic, but expecting the galaxy to turn on the Jedi was faulty thinking. That would take countless more generations, and there was no guarantee that the future Sith would be as talented as the two of them were. Plagueis did see a point with this, but he was curious as to why Sidious would automatically have this desire to fill their ranks. To Plagueis, it seemed like Sidious wanted allies to back him up so that he could turn on his master. At this point in time, Plagueis was a far superior duelist, and he'd be able to wipe the floor with Palpatine if he dared try to strike him down. Sidious knew this too, but he didn't fear his master as much as Plagueis may have thought. He just understood that he wouldn't be able to destroy him without an advantage. While Sidious had aspirations to kill his instructor, they were not set in motion yet. He was letting the ideas fester in his mind until he brought them to fruition. Sidious denied these accusations and admitted that his greatest concern was the strength of the Sith. After an intense discussion, of which transpiring for several hours into several days, the two of them would come to a conclusion. They'd reignite the flame of the Sith Empire. It wouldn't be easy though, and they both understood that. But there was one thing that would be true. Plagueis had no interest in training another student. If Palpatine wanted this, he would have to be the one to bear the torch. Sidious was perfectly content with this. It meant that he could turn whichever Sith he brought into their order against Plagueis with a snap of his fingers. There were some other guidelines that the Sith Lord wanted filled out and understood, of which they were, but they would never be permanent to Sidious. His first three students would come in the form of brothers, all of them from Dathomir, Maul, Savage, and Ferrell being their names. Sidious knew that they had potential for greatness, and so he began their training. This would continue for years as Sidious grew his plans within his mind. By the time the Trade Federation had blockaded Naboo, he had another apprentice in his back pocket, one named Dooku. The Jedi Master would soon turn, and it would follow after an engagement Maul had with Qui-Gon. Sidious didn't want the Jedi catching on to the rupture of the Rule of Two, so he sent his best trained student out to face the Jedi. Maul killed Qui-Gon and was cut in half by Kenobi. Dooku fled from the Jedi after the ceremony on Naboo was complete. To ensure Dooku would remain loyal to the cause as a temporary fix to an issue, he'd make sure that Savage and Ferrell went into hiding on Naboo. Sidious had everything planned out the way he wanted it. However, there was one little mix-up. Ferrell could sense Maul's essence and he believed his brother was still alive. Sidious saw this as wishful thinking, but if Maul had indeed survived, then there was potential use for him in the future. Sidious knew the key to the brothers was loyalty. If he showed loyalty to them, then surely it would be reciprocated. He intended on them following him for the foreseeable future, because all of them had incredibly high ceilings. Similar to Dooku, Savage and Ferrell took up issues with the fact that Maul had gone in alone and was defeated, but Sidious reminded them that permanence inside the ranks of the Sith was through sheer strength. Speaking of such strength, because Sidious was so big on that, he killed his master. He just didn't do it honorably. To secure himself a future without any struggles or issues, Palpatine killed his master in his sleep. It was a quick and easy move that came the night after he was elected to the Chancellor's office inside the Senate. It was a triumphant victory for the Sith. Plagueis would never get to see his students' plans play out. It truly was a tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Because Sidious knew that Dooku would have issues with the Zabraks and the fact that the Rule of Two was actually a lie, he came up with a plan that he would incorporate to keep them working together, without knowing the other was a Sith. Dooku was aware of Maul, but not the other two brothers. This was done intentionally by Sidious. The reign of the Sith would only be for true Sith, and Dooku was never meant to be anything other than temporary. Aside from the fact that he'd be close to 100 years old by the time everything was set into motion, Sidious didn't need someone as expendable as Dooku running around. Instead, Dooku's place in the Sith Empire was setting up a separatist movement. All the while, Sidious would continue adding to the ranks of the Sith, and even allow Dooku to do the same. Everything would work for Darth Sidious. He would soon be informed that his pupil, Maul, had survived on Naboo. He was a wreck though, barely alive, held together by the dark side. His failures may have been unapologetically pathetic, but the Sith could make good use out of them. Sidious would make an example of Maul by torturing him in front of his brothers. He of course would make sure that Maul survived that ordeal as well, but not without a mark. If Maul failed again, he knew what the price would be. Sidious continued forward from there, and focused on his grand scheme. Farrell and Savage played the roles they were meant to play, more or less allies of the Separatist cause, from two separate locations though. Maul, on the other hand, would continue looking for new allies, ones that Sidious could turn to the dark side. There were 10,000 Jedi, and not every single one of them needed to die. So for the next 13 years, the galaxy would pass by. For Sidious, the time flew, because he was always busy. When he wasn't pushing Skywalker further into darkness, he was leading the galaxy. If he wasn't doing either of those, he was training his Sith students, or pushing Dooku wherever he wanted to push Dooku. He was like a misguided child. Sidious would place his hands on his shoulders and push him wherever he wanted him to be. Dooku wasn't stupid, but Sidious was specific with what he wanted. If it was done wrong, then it would have to be done again until made perfect. This master plan required absolute precision and luck. During those 13 years, a couple new individuals would be brought along. Among them were former Jedi, Asajj Ventress, Quinlan Vos, Baylan Skoll, and Pong Krell. There were also 12 more other Jedi who followed these masters and knights into their order. The fact that Sidious could pull this many Jedi into his ranks was more than enough of an ego boost for him, but the fact that all of them would outlive Dooku as a Sith was funny. Sidious never let any of these Jedi see the light of day again. Using A&T bots and the dark side, he reconstructed the ruined temple on Moraband so that his Jedi could be housed there. He wanted them to bathe in the dark side, and considering Dooku wasn't involved in this process, Maul, Farrell, and Savage would oversee these Jedi training to become Sith. Maul had made up for his errors, and Savage made a couple appearances during the Clone Wars, even making him earn Sidious's trust more than Maul's. In one offhand occasion, Savage beat Plo Koon in a fight by ripping off his mask. It was during this engagement that Sidious believed Savage might be the superior of the three brothers. He was unsure before, but he realized it now. However, as more individuals joined their cause, he realized that there was a disconnect between the brothers and himself. Sidious couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't treachery and it wasn't betrayal. He knew what that was because he could sense that within Dooku, not the brothers. So he just kept a close eye on them. Before the end of the Clone Wars, they had accounted for 4 Jedi deaths, Savage holding 2 and Farrell and Maul holding 1 each. When the war came crashing down to an end, Skywalker killed Dooku, and once Order 66 was executed, Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. Though things did not last that way forever, as Vader would find himself in trouble on Mustafar, where he would be defeated by his master. Sidious would be most displeased with the turn of events that transpired. Forcing Anakin into the suit of Darth Vader would be pleasurable. He was originally going to toss Skywalker back into the lava river, but considering he had the raw anger and fury to keep himself alive after his devastating loss, Sidious figured he'd give him another chance. But Lord Vader would have stiff competition. It may have been a secret that Sidious wanted Skywalker to be his main apprentice, but the fact that he's defeated after being the chosen one would make some of the other former Jedi see opportunity to take him down. Vader would have to work extra hard to come back from his greatest failure. The suit would be an entirely different ballgame for him, but at the very least, he was the most menacing of all the Sith. Sidious had plans for training Vader, and they would be done, but at the moment, his main focus was the beginning of the Empire. He would slowly integrate his Sith into the Imperial Military, similar to how the Jedi were with the Republic. When that time came for the integration, he would explain it very simply to the Empire and the entire public. This did not come immediately after Order 66. Essentially, he would tell the public that the Sith and the Jedi were warring factions. The Sith were the ones loyal to the Republic and therefore the Empire. They upheld peace, they stood for justice, and they held a power that the Jedi desired. When the time came, the Jedi overwhelmed them and forced them into hiding. A rule of 2 was created so that the warriors of justice could survive the Jedi occupation of the galaxy. The Sith tried countless times to rise up to the Jedi Empire, but they were cast away to the shadows. The Jedi made the Sith look like villains. They got legislation passed to paint them as bearers of darkness. He would then say that the Sith had returned, and they would become a part of the Imperial Military. Sidious would never claim to be a Sith when he said this announcement, and he would never associate himself with them. That was just a script he would read from whenever the time came that he wanted to integrate the Sith into the Empire. Regardless, going forward, the fallen Jedi of the former Order were brought into the ranks of the Sith, most of them becoming Inquisitors under the leadership of Grand Inquisitor. The Sith ranks weren't that vast, and because they were still working in secrecy, they didn't have the backing of the Empire. Sidious knew he couldn't bring the Sith up to people yet. They would associate the Sith with the Jedi. Most people of the general public didn't know the difference. They just saw a Force wielder and assumed they were a Jedi. The following year would be of Imperial growth, and would be incredibly important for the Sith. Sidious did away with the clone troopers mostly, and then pushed forward the Imperial Military. Topoka City was destroyed. His contingency plans were put into action. The Inquisitors grew and hunted down Jedi, and Lord Vader became a powerhouse, to an extent. Vader had a lot more ground to cover, but the Sith were finally coming together as a strong force. There were now close to 40 Sith, and Sidious was very impressed with this little plan, but it needed to go further. He devised a plan to continue growing the Sith ranks, while also aiding his necromancer project. Mount Tantus was a big secret base, and no one knew about it. Sidious was saving the second Sith Wayfinder for the appropriate student. He just didn't know who that would be yet. Vader was the original one that was supposed to get it, but due to his failure, it was going to now go to the strongest Sith. On the other side of the galaxy, the dark side had grown exponentially, and due to the Jedi fleeing the Sith, the survivors of the Fallen Order knew they needed to rise up. Yoda and Kenobi decided against going into hiding, because of the disappearance of key Jedi throughout the war. Yoda theorized, just as the Council did, that the Jedi had joined the dark side like Dooku. Being that they were never seen again, there was speculation that they had been lured away from the Order and killed. It was this suspicion that drove Obi-Wan and Yoda back to the fight. They were able to rally other surviving Jedi before they were either killed or found by the Inquisitors. But they weren't obviously fast enough to stop all of them from turning to the dark side. The Jedi, led by Yoda, mounted up at Jakastanu's cache, and prepared from there. Jakast had a collection of items from the temple, most of which being important documents that safeguarded the history of their order. Yoda brought the survivors here so that they could have a home. They left all the younglings and Padawans with Jocasta and Taras Anube. At the same time, all the warriors would go to Coruscant to destroy Sidious and bring an end to his terror on the galaxy. They believed that Bail Organa or Mon Mothma would be able to politically outmaneuver anyone else inside the Senate, so as long as Sidious was gone, the galaxy was safer. They moved for Coruscant together. Among the warriors collected for the secret mission were Obi-Wan, Yoda, Coleman Kaj, Kirik Infila, Sha Kun, Ultra Swan, Ahsoka, and Luminar Unduli. It wasn't much, but they believed it was enough to destroy Sidious. It was one Sith versus a collection of survivors. They could make the most out of themselves. When they arrived, they moved under the cover of darkness. The Emperor's shuttle was still on the landing platform on the planet. As the Jedi moved through the building, Ahsoka stopped them and told them that something felt off. Obi-Wan felt that too, but neither of them could figure out why everything felt so weird. They felt that perhaps they should call the mission off and follow Palpatine to his residence instead, but Yoda was very adamant that they go and fight. The Jedi followed as Kenobi and Ahsoka reluctantly did too. They came down to a corridor and followed Yoda to the Emperor's office. He was seated behind his desk and he was facing the window. When the Jedi walked in, the doors were sealed behind them, and Sidious turned his chair around with a heinous smile. He told the Jedi that came to fight him that he'd been expecting them. Sidious didn't know when, but he knew the Jedi would try and counter him. He had everything the way he wanted it too. He actually fantasized about a moment like this, one in which he could truly have a victory against the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Sidious stood up from his chair, and with a wave of his hand, 2 lightsabers sped into his hands, and he held them. He told the grouping of Jedi they made a terrible mistake. His lightsabers ignited, and the Jedi did the same, their blades ringing out throughout the Emperor's chamber. He grinned when the first Jedi moved in. It was Yoda after all. He blocked and parried, thrusting his left blade forward behind his head to block a strike from Kenobi. Using electricity, he threw Sha into Kirak. His usage of the dark side was incredible, and he thrived with this many opponents, but against Yoda, he would never be able to do this forever. Sidious shoved Obi-Wan backwards and over a chair as he lifted himself off the ground and landed on the desk. As he did this, more lightsabers ignited. Because Sidious was so sure of a Jedi uprising, the Senate was littered with his greatest warriors, just hidden in Imperial upper-class apparel. Farrell, Savage, Maul, Krell, and Ventress were all present. They were informed of the intruders when Sidious pressed a button under his desk when he turned around. The Jedi were surrounded, and then they broke off. Yoda engaged Sidious, Kirik versus Savage, Maul and Sha Kun. Farrell fended off Bolter Swan. Ventress rematched with Luminar Unduli, leaving Ahsoka and Kenobi to turn their attention towards the Sith Lord. They couldn't totally interfere with Yoda because it could distract him from gaining a victory. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan helped where they could, either assisting other Jedi or trying to distract Sidious. It became increasingly difficult though. Savage overpowered Master Infilla and flung across the room, forcing Kenobi to toil with the oversized Zabrak. Maul at the same time was able to slash down Plo Koon's niece before re-engaging with Ahsoka for the first time since Mandalore. The fight continued getting worse for the Jedi as Asajj Ventress once again defeated Luminar unduly, kicking her in the throat before throwing one of her blades to her chest and decapitating her with the other swing. As the fight was intensifying, the doors opened and a deep breathing echoed throughout the chamber. The Jedi didn't have the strength to acknowledge this dark presence, but Obi-Wan and Ahsoka immediately turned their heads over. They knew his presence for some reason. Sidious batted Yoda away and chanted out in an echoey voice, calling Lord Vader's name out and demanding that he join the fight and kill the Jedi. Vader was here for another reason. Other than the other Sith, there was another Jedi inside the temple that he gutted. After his victory, he was bringing the lightsaber back to his master. When Yoda, Kenobi, and Ahsoka heard the name Vader, they realized that Anakin never died. He'd been brought back to life in this evil cocoon of Darth Vader. His lightsaber ignited, and the fight resumed. The Sith continued to dominate the other Jedi. Yoda and Sidious continued their engagement as Kenobi and Ahsoka banded together to fight off the other Sith that had begun surrounding them. Bolter cut one of Farrell's horns before Savage pulled her off the ground and Farrell landed the killing blow. Coleman Kaj was then very quickly gutted by the much superior Pong Krell, and all that remained were Ahsoka and Kenobi, aside from Yoda. The Sith didn't hold back. The three brothers went after Obi-Wan and Ahsoka moved after her former teacher. The other Sith held back, watching the fight take place in front of them. Ahsoka tried to get into Vader's head, but he was focused on one objective, defeating her. Their blades clashed back and forth, and Vader was thrown back by her acrobatic skill. Vader was struggling for two reasons: lack of maneuverability, and having only been in the suit for a year. With more time, this fight would have been much more balanced. There was also one crucial reason for why Vader was so engaged in this. The other Sith taunted him consistently for having lost to Obi-Wan, and so he was in it to win it, to prove that he was a true Sith. Kenobi, on the other side of the room, proved why he was the master defense. He used the three Zabraks against each other, throwing their blades towards each brother and parrying where he could. They all had him on their hit list because of what he did to Maul 13 years before. Kenobi knew they wanted revenge, and he allowed it to play into his favor. Ahsoka pressed further against her former teacher, and in a moment of weakness, she asked where her master was. She knew he was in there somewhere. She still didn't believe Anakin was responsible for what he did, and Vader seized the opportunity to pull her blade out of her hand before striking her down with one powerful swing. The sound of her body hitting the floor was jarring for Kenobi, but it was enough of a distraction for Maul to land his strike. It went straight through Obi-Wan's abdomen, and he fell off the blade. Maul stood over him and knelt down, pressing the tip of his metallic knee into Kenobi's throat, a move that would eventually kill his longtime rival. Behind Maul, Sidious and Yoda toiled back and forth. The dark versus the light. Every Sith in the room turned their attention towards their Emperor. Their fight had gone on for the entire duration of the Jedi attack, and it was becoming clear. The Grand Master was wearing down. Sidious figured out his opponent from their last engagement. This time he was prepared with a different form to conserve his own energy. Sidious's brilliance is he showed off the same form he used during their previous engagement, but it wasn't the same. Due to all the Jedi dying around him, Yoda couldn't pick up on the slight change, and he paid the price for it. Sidious drew out the fight for another 20 minutes before dragging his blade across Yoda's torso and throwing him to the ground. Yoda smashed across the carpet, and under his dying breath, he watched the Sith, some of which being former Jedi, kneel before the Sith Lord. Similarly to Dooku, Sidious gave Master Yoda his piece. The Jedi were seemingly gone. Sidious obviously didn't care for this attack. He used it to prop up the Sith as allies of the Empire. Using every strategy he planned on using, he was able to present the victory of the Sith as a plausible excuse for them to become a part of the Empire. The tragedy is, he had a hologram showing the Jedi attempting to assassinate him, and it depicted the Sith coming to save him. It was all edited, but no one needed to know that. The main point is that it did exactly what he wanted it to do. The Sith were integrated into the Empire, and they, alongside the Inquisitors, would continue to serve the Empire for the next couple decades. By 0 BBY, the Sith Empire had grown to 300 members. Most of these Sith were Inquisitor level, but he kept the reins on them because he wanted things the way they were, ranked out. Every Sith knew their place. The ones that were Inquisitor level served under Grand Inquisitor. Those who weren't served under Maul or Vader. However, just as was noted 20 years before by Sidious, there was a growing tension in the ranks of the Sith. It had been there, and it mostly resonated from the three Zabraks. Sidious allowed them to perpetuate this tension, but never gave it a chance to boil to a head. It just meant that the hatred between the Zabraks and what seemed to be Vader continued to fester. This fueled them to be better and better, but Sidious had yet given his second Wayfinder to another Sith. He kept it for a good reason. With so many Sith joining their ranks, he had 3 test subjects, ones totally loyal and completely willing to sacrifice their bodies for the greater good of their Emperor. Some of them would give up their limbs, others would simply have blood drawn. It did not matter. What it did do was amp up the production of the Imperial Science Divisions on Mount Tantus, Jakku, and Exegol. It all played into Sidious's hands wonderfully. As the Dark Lord was preparing for his first attempt at transferring out of his body into a younger one, the Sith on Coruscant had their chance to make a move. The Jedi Temple now belonged to the Sith, and inside, Vader and Maul challenged each other for the chance to become Sidious's true apprentice. The challenge came from Maul, who believed he had been wrongly replaced by the wrong Sith. He should be the #1 apprentice. Savage and Farrell supported their brother, even though he was technically putting them below himself. But they knew this was for a good cause, and they trusted Maul's intelligence. A duel between Maul and Vader would commence in the Grand Hall of the former Jedi Temple. Their crimson blades ignited, and they tussled with each other across the halls. On Exegol, Sidious transferred his body into a Force-sensitive clone. The clone itself had a higher midichlorian count than his own, which meant he gave himself more power to work with. On top of that, he now possessed the face of a younger man, a younger version of himself. The scientists ran tests and found that there were no complications with the essence transfer. He was 100% fine, and he would remain completely intact without any medical issues. To ensure the other Sith never caught on, Sidious would continue to wear his cloak low on his head. If they caught on, then they would chase immortality too. Without the knowledge of its existence, then there would be no need to chase it. While he was placing the other Sith Wayfinder inside of his throne, his loyalists shipped off a number of non-Force-sensitive clones. The hope is that they would mate with another and produce more Force-sensitive offspring, because just like the Jedi, most people came from non-Force-sensitive families. Tragically, most of them would find a means of self-destruction. Not all of them, but most of them, and because of their lineage to Palpatine, they would likely produce a child of Force sensitivity. Inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, the two Sith threw each other back and forth. Maul was older at this point, but his skills had been maintained and he was healthier than ever before. He shoved Vader into the wall before the Dark Lord cut a pillar down and threw it at Maul. The Zabrak jumped back and used the pillar to steal an advantage. One Kenobi used against both of them. Maul secured himself a spot on a catwalk, and as Vader used the pillar to climb up, Maul sped down, kicking forward and destroying Vader's chest piece. The two of them would continue. Vader's heavy strikes were consistently an issue for Maul during the fight, but his agility is what saved him. He escaped Vader's strong points and forced Vader out of his comfort zone and into his own. Vader was shoved back in front of the other 300 Sith. He would be executed right inside the hall his journey as a Sith began. Vader was defeated simply due to the effects the suit had on him in comparison to what Maul had to deal with without legs. When Sidious returned, he was surprised to say the least, but he was willing to accept the predicament. If Vader wasn't strong enough to survive, then he wasn't strong enough to be a Sith. It also was at this point that the first sign of rebellion had died off, and a Jedi resurgence in the shadows began creeping towards the front of the galaxy again. Due to the Sith interference for the last 20 years, the rebellion never got off the ground. Any insurgents were dealt with by squads of Sith. The Jedi path was discovered and eradicated, but there were still a number of unaccounted for Jedi and Force-sensitive children in the galaxy. Sidious was wary of two things: the three Zabraks and the potential for these children to bring forth new chosen ones. They were to exist somewhere in the galaxy, so when would they come to him? He didn't know. The last sight of the Jedi would be around 15 ABY. Note, there is no Battle of Yavin. I'm using BBY and ABY to make things easier time-wise. The collection of Jedi would involve those who spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. Luke and Leia Skywalker, who had been here since they were babies, Cal Kestis, Gungi, and a number of other Jedi, and 2 Jedi Masters. Because of the failure that had taken place on Coruscant, the Jedi tried fighting on their own turf. They called the Sith to Tython, and what resulted was their worst nightmare. Sidious arrived with his best forces and they marched out. There were about 20 Jedi, and Sidious arrived with 50 Sith, but he made things fair. He sent out 10 of his best warriors: Ventress, Maul and his brothers, Krell, Quinlan, Grand Inquisitor, and a couple of the other newer members. Sidious stood at the edge of the hill and watched. He informed the Jedi that his forces were not to intervene, and they had an advantage. They better not let it slip. But just like the Jedi of old, they couldn't help but fail themselves. The Zabrak brothers were fighting with purpose, and Sidious noted this, but watched with almost pity. The Jedi were no match. The twins were the only two really standing much of a fight. Cal Kestis was thrown back and forth between Savage and Pharaoh before being cut down. Gungi was a powerful Wookiee warrior, but his ferocity was no match for the speed of Ventress, and the poor older Jedi both killed in one volley by Pong Grell. Truthfully, it was pathetic. The Jedi numbers dropped one by one, until the twins were left. Sidious wouldn't give them a chance. If they fought for this long and never realized they didn't stand a chance and they didn't belong with the Sith. It was that simple. They were defeated, and Leia would be killed while holding her dead brother in her arms. Sidious would also never know that they were the offspring of Anakin Skywalker, but just like their father, they were no match for beings bred from the Sith. Due to the success of his essence transfer, Sidious was going to be immortal. For the Zabrak brothers, they hoped that they could wait him out, but there was never a show of him slowing down. Of course, they believed he was weak for not fighting against the Jedi on Tython, but that was just him showing off his power. He didn't need to be involved. He was responsible for the deaths of two of the most powerful Jedi in the Order, and he was also crucial for the fall of both Anakin Skywalker and Dooku, two Jedi with more potential than any other in their old order. He had won enough fights. To Savage, that wasn't enough though. Maul had come to terms with everything, and Pharaoh wasn't nearly as cynical as his other brothers. But Savage had been instigating issues. The other brothers were more inclined to take his side than anyone else's. The Dark Lord the Sith knew his days with the brothers were numbered, and so he allowed them to continue growing in their hate and in their power. He had another clone prepared for him on Exegol just in case he died, built so much that he wouldn't dare lose it. Then nothing ever came. It seemed like he was only becoming paranoid, as if everything around him was coming towards him at hyperspeed. He then lowered his guard, and nothing came. To his surprise, the Zabraks became more loyal, and he believed this to be bait, but there was never a show of resistance. They continued doing their master's bidding, even bringing him the daughter of a man who had been on the run from the Emperor himself. Thanks to the Sith hunter, Ochia Bestoon, Maul was able to bring forth to the Emperor the first sign of his success in the field of non-Force-sensitive clones. The granddaughter wasn't a clone, but her father was, and she was of Sidious's power. He didn't let anyone know what she was. Instead, he wanted her to be bred through the competition of the Sith ranks. If she was indeed his granddaughter, then she would find herself by his side within the coming years. Sidious's paranoia never withered away, and everything seemed right. The Zabrak brothers never turned on him, and the Emperor of the Galaxy was able to rejoice in the success of his empire. But that wasn't the end of the story. In his sleep, the three Zabraks would exact their revenge. They all admired Plagueis greatly, and instead of killing Sidious, they allowed him to build them an empire, give them a voice, and allow them to follow in his footsteps. When they killed him in his sleep, they felt relief and true power. However, they were surprised when their weakest brother dropped to the ground under the sound of a crack in his neck. Savage and Maul turned back and saw their master, except he was younger. His smile was sinister, and they prepared to cut him down, but then he was gone within a blur. They ran out of the room and looked around for Sidious. From the bed rose his dead body, and the two brothers turned on it. But when they cut it down, they were unsuccessful. The next thing they knew, their brother had been infused with dark magic, similar to what was used on Dathomir, and then he attacked them. The trauma of cutting down their own brother, one they spent an entire lifetime with, was difficult and painful, but that was only just the beginning of their torture, because all of it, every single second of it, was a vision. They never struck Sidious's body, they never saw an apparition, but they did kill their brother. They were going to kill the Emperor, but they didn't even make it into the front door. Pharaoh was on the ground, cut to shreds by his brothers because of what they saw in the vision. Sidious then cut the two brothers limb from limb and hoisted their still alive bodies up inside the Great Hall of the Sith Temple on Coruscant. The first memory his granddaughter had was that of two Sith who had spent nearly 8 decades as Sidious's right-hand men, hung up and hoisted for all to see, for betraying their Emperor. It would become her goal to become her Emperor's most prided student. When that day came, Rey would be welcomed in by her evil grandfather and be informed that she was one with him. Sidious's victories never ended. His lineage of students and grandchildren carried on. He never aged. His students never stopped rallying to his feet, and his empire would be that of the eternal Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Sidious. And that, my friends, is our evil story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Ben Ingram, the Big Red Beer Mark, Diamond Constant, Lord Tib, Darth Nemesis, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliand, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Sharkman Dory, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sith Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Gunley 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Force League Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Darksaint 46, Baron Joshua, and Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. Super cool things on there. There's an animation coming soon. I'm super excited. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. I wanted this story to feel like Sidious's power. I wanted him to really show that he was a master manipulator, and that by controlling people the way he did and does, he would be able to enlist himself literally an eternal empire. I think his shortfalls came at moments where his luck ran out. The corruption of Anakin and Ben Solo are all things that happened because of his master manipulation, and so that would be very integral to him building the foundation for the Sith Empire. And I wanted a tension to be there between Maul, Farrell, and Savage with Sidious, but I didn't want them to become victorious. I think because of Sidious and how his mind works, I think he'd be able to see it coming before it ever did. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.